They always freeze the frame at the worst possible microsecond, sound stripped out, context shaved off, a single gesture pinched between two thumbnails, and then ask you to believe it explains a relationship. In the clip everyone is passing around, Queen Camilla turns, lifts her hand at waist level, palm down, and traces a small arc in the air. The Princess of Wales, who has been chatting to the First Lady with the ease she spent years practicing, registers the cue at once, smiles, and drifts a step back toward William. On loop, without the music or the movement of the room, it looks like a shoe. In real time, it reads like what it almost certainly was, stagecraft. Windsor runs on inches and seconds. It's a place where carriages arrive at the tempo of hooves, where honor guards form corridors measured to the shoulder, where the press pen becomes restless if it senses an unscripted pause. In that language, a palm-down sweep is just punctuation. Clear the channel, restore the symmetry, let the next cue land on the beat. Catherine is fluent in that grammar. She doesn't flinch, doesn't harden, doesn't even break the line of her smile. She finishes her aside to the First Lady, yields the space, and the picture reforms so cleanly that, in the room, most people would have missed the adjustment entirely. That's the skill, make an inevitable correction look like a choice. Awkward, the captions insist. If you strip away the soundscape, the band counting time, the quiet directives from staff, the distant clatter of harness, the gesture can look sharper than it felt. But awkwardness leaves residue. It shows up in shoulders, in eyes, in the tiny delays that creep in when someone feels chastened. None of that appears here. Catherine answers the cue like a dancer who knows the choreography and respects the partner. Camilla drops her hand and immediately folds back into the welcome. The First Lady keeps her poise. The beat holds, which is everything. Why did a 2-second signal swell into a theory? Because the internet loves its dynasties simplified, and two royal women with different public temperaments make irresistible opposites. One is read as meticulous, contained, strategically quiet, the other, as outward, talk first, with a ready laugh and a stage manager's instinct. That difference becomes, in lazy telling, tense. In reality, it's how the day gets done, complementary styles covering different vulnerabilities. An outgoing queen can see jams forming before anyone else and fix them with a flick. A controlled princess can absorb heat without showing it and move the story along without making herself the story. You don't need to be best friends to do that well. You do need trust, professional, not sentimental. There's also the static of the week around them. Hours earlier, the family walked a rare Catholic requiem with willow and restraint. Hours later, the castle would need to turn diplomacy into a banquet that sounds like oak and photographs like light. Between those poles, grief's hush and statecraft's blaze, the lawn greeting had to feel inevitable. Anything that threatened to fracture the frame, even a charming chat held 2 beats too long, was going to get tided. Not scolded, tided. The difference matters. Tidying is protective. It saves everyone from the edit bay. Shooing is a verb loaded with disrespect because it implies superiority without kindness. Watch the faces. If there had been a rebuke in that small arc, you would have seen it bite. Catherine has a reflex for frost, she doesn't weaponize it, but she can let it settle a situation in a heartbeat when needed. None of that lived in her eyes. What lived there was the look of someone who recognized the cue before it fully formed. That is how long partnerships behave, military drill, newsroom handoffs, live television control rooms. You feel the next beat coming and you clear the path because the music has to hold. Of course the rumor mill prefers psychology to logistics. Hesitant to pass the crown. Suggest the headlines, as if a gesture on a windy lawn could decode private feelings about succession. The truth about succession is much duller and more durable. It happens in public, in front of cameras, to a schedule none of the principals control. If you want to see confidence in the future, don't look for subtext in a palm, look at the workload on the airs. Look at who opens the door at the helicopter and who anchors the third carriage, who courts the crowd without overfeeding it, who posts a single photograph ready for the state banquet and lets the picture do the talking. That is how a reigning house shows it is already preparing to hand the song to the next voice. If you still need proof the gesture was a cue and not a cut, watch what happened next. The line straightened, the corridor cleared, the carriages rolled. Later, the hall did what it always does, turned nerves into ceremony. Catherine walked in wearing a gold lace coat that photographed like a thesis on British craft. Camilla wore blue that caught the stone's cool and returned it as warmth. Plates landed in synchronized silence, toasts rose and fell without anyone stepping on a word. The evening told the country what such evenings are built to tell: we can still do this, and we can do it without wobble. A scolded daughter-in-law doesn't settle an entire room like that. A team that knows itself does. As for the video's second life, zoomed, looped, captioned, it tells you more about us than about them. We're anxious about civility, hungry for slips that confirm our suspicions about power, and bored by competence. Two women keeping a complicated are smooth doesn't travel nearly as far as a myth about rivalry. So the clip becomes a Rorschach. People see frost if they want frost, they see professionalism if they respect the craft. The palace won't dignify it with an explanation because explanations are gasoline. Their preference, honed over 1,000 storms, is to let the rhythm vindicate the moment. If the room stayed steady, the choice was right. There's a smaller point here about how these women work. Camilla's public warmth isn't recklessness, it's a tool. It buys forgiveness for tiny redirects no one wants to see. Catherine's reserve isn't distance, it's ballast. It keeps the weather even when every gust tries to change the sky. The job is not to be alike, the job is to be additive. On the lawn, in the hall, on the steps where carriages feel bigger than they are, that's exactly what you saw, an additive hour. Could the gesture have been gentler? It already was. Could it have been avoided? Only if the day decided to be less itself, fewer photographers, no horses, guests who never pause in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is not how state visits behave. They are a tide. The best you can do is read the pull and keep everyone standing. Which is what that small arc did. Which is what Catherine's half-step did. Which is why, by nightfall, the only people still convinced they'd watched a snub were the ones who needed the story before the day began. One last test: imagine the clip without titles. No shoe, no tense, no hesitant. Just the wind, the hat brims, the distance to the arch, the sound of harness farther off than it feels. In that version, you see the gesture the room saw: make space. In that version, you notice what got saved: the clean line, the welcome that looked inevitable, the next beat landing on time. That is what these jobs are, most days saving the beat. And if the palace were ever to turn this into a lesson, they won't, but if, it would be the same quiet one they teach their teams every time a camera blinks where it shouldn't: don't argue with the angle, outlast it. The lawn moment will lurch around feeds for a few more days, collecting adjectives from people who weren't there and wouldn't have heard the cue even if they were. Then it will dissolve, as misread seconds do. What will remain is the photograph that actually matters: 4 figures at a threshold, arranged so the eye never panics, a welcome that never lost its breath. That is the story. The rest is weather.